The discovery by the Dead Sea. The sun blazed, scorching Orpah's nape and turning the delicate hairs there to tinder. Above the Dead Sea, the air, saturated with saline tang and mineral dust, vibrated like a plucked string, twisting the stark landscape into a mirage. Her flock, a dusty, clamorous mass, nibbled half-heartedly at the meager vegetation clinging to the craggy slopes. A quick head count confirmed her dread. Beth was missing. A cold fist clenched in Orpah's gut. Little Beth, blessed with an adventurous streak and cursed with woolly-headed obstinacy, had wandered off again. Beth! Orpah's voice, raspy with dryness, snagged in the arid air. Only a raven's desolate croak answered. She squinted, charting the broken terrain. The lamb had a weakness for the water's edge, for that strange, still expanse, and Orpah knew better than to underestimate Beth's singular focus. With a sigh, she adjusted the homespun shawl weighting her shoulders. This was shaping up to be one of those days. She picked up the thread of Beth's tiny tracks, a path diverging from the herd and angling toward the serrated cliffs bordering the sea. The rocks bit at her feet even through her worn sandals, and Orpah picked her way carefully. Nearing the rock face, the air cooled, the sharp scent of salt giving way to a loamy fragrance. Rounding a crag, she spotted it, a shadowed maw in the stone, nearly swallowed by a thicket of thorns. A cave, or the ghost of one. She'd never noticed it before, despite years spent pasturing her sheep on this land. A familiar pull, a blend of longing and apprehension, stirred within her. Could Beth have squeezed inside? Beth, she tried again, the sound bouncing off the unseen walls. Silence greeted her. She wrestled aside the thorny branches, wincing as they tore at her shawl. The entrance, a tight fit, demanded she shuffle sideways. Inside, the air hung hushed and cool, a blessing after the sun's relentless assault. Her eyes struggled to pierce the gloom. The space was cramped, barely more than a few strides deep and wide. Weak sunlight seeped through the opening, revealing rough-hewn walls. It smelled of damp earth and something older, something nameless and profound. Then she saw her. Beth, contentedly grazing on a patch of moss clinging to the back wall, utterly unaware of the panic she'd caused. Beth. Relief surged, almost knocking her off her feet. She gathered the lamb into her arms, burying her face in the downy fleece. "You little menace. You nearly gave me a heart attack." As she turned back toward the light, something in the shadows caught her eye. A tightly bound roll, secured with time-worn leather thongs, lay partially hidden beneath a scattering of loose stones and grime. Gently setting Beth down, Orpah knelt, sweeping away the debris. The roll possessed unexpected heft. The leather felt fragile, threatening to crumble at the slightest pressure. With painstaking care, she loosened the fastenings, her fingers trembling with a strange anticipation. As the leather gave way, she discovered it was a scroll, but not of papyrus, as she'd assumed, but of fine, densely woven material unlike any she had encountered. The script was even more bewildering. Not Hebrew, not Aramaic, not any tongue she recognized. Instead, a sequence of symbols, angular and graceful, aligned in precise columns. Some echoed familiar forms, a stylized bird, a waning moon, yet others remained utterly foreign. She traced the raised texture of the ink with her fingertips. It felt ancient, burdened by a history she could only dimly grasp. What was it? Who had inscribed these marks, and why conceal them within this forgotten hollow? A shiver snaked down her spine. She knew, with a certainty that bypassed reason, that this was significant, capable of reshaping her understanding of the world. A glance at Beth, now happily sniffing at the cave floor, reminded her of the vulnerability of her find. It was too easily stumbled upon, too easily dismissed. But to take it felt like a trespass, a violation of the sacred. Yet the allure of the unknown proved irresistible. This discovery couldn't be ignored. The symbols hummed with an unspoken invitation, hinting at lost narratives and veiled truths. She envisioned the artisan who had crafted this scroll, the scholar who had deciphered its secrets, the voices that had uttered the words it contained. She had to know its meaning. Carefully, she re-rolled the scroll and fastened it with the fragile leather. Tucking it securely within the folds of her shawl, she lifted Beth and started toward the cave mouth, the scroll's weight a silent promise against her back. Stepping back into the sun's glare, she surveyed the Dead Sea, a timeless, impassive witness to her revelation. The world felt irrevocably altered, imbued with a palpable sense of wonder. She hastened her steps, eager to return home and examine the scroll more closely. She would show it to her father. Surely he could offer some insight. Or perhaps Ezra the scribe, though she suspected he would scoff at it as pagan drivel. Regardless, she would not rest until she had decoded the secrets locked within those enigmatic symbols. The truth, she sensed, awaited its unveiling. Grandmother Ruth's wisdom. The sun bled orange and crimson onto the horizon as Orpah hastened towards Grandmother Ruth's cottage, a knot of unease twisting in her stomach. Entrusting the scroll felt like relinquishing a fragment of her soul, a secret embraced just hours before, yet already deeply intertwined with her being. She pushed open the sturdy oak door, a comforting medley of wood smoke and dried herbs enveloping her. By the hearth, Ruth sat silhouetted against the dancing flames. Seeing Orpah, the elder woman's face, a tapestry of wrinkles woven by time and wisdom, softened. "Orpah, child, you seem troubled. Come, warm yourself by the fire." Her voice resonated with a deep, soothing timbre, like the echo of thunder across distant hills. Orpah settled onto the stool, the scroll clutched possessively in her hand, and hesitated, searching for the right words. "Grandmother, I stumbled upon something today." Ruth's gaze remained steady, patient. "And what might this something be, child?" Inhaling deeply, Orpah unfurled the scroll, the aged parchment whispered in the stillness. She carefully placed it on Ruth's lap. "I unearthed it in a cavern, up near the high pasture. I was out searching for Beth." Ruth leaned closer, her aged, yet keenly observant eyes, tracing the unfamiliar symbols etched into the scroll. The firelight flickered across the ancient script, accentuating its intricate design. Silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire, as she studied it intently. Finally, she breathed, her voice almost inaudible. This is Moabite. Ancient Moabite." Orpah felt a surge of hope. "You know it? You understand what it is?" Ruth offered a slow nod. "I've encountered fragments before, inscriptions on weathered stones. My own grandmother, she possessed greater knowledge. But much has been lost through the years." Gently, she trailed a calloused finger across the faded ink. "This discovery, Orpah, is remarkably rare." Relief flooded Orpah, giving way to exhilaration. Can you decipher it? Can you tell me its meaning?" Ruth sighed, a wisp of air that disturbed the dust motes swirling in the fire's glow. "It will prove challenging. The script is faded, and my understanding, it has limits. Still, I will endeavor. I will endeavor for you, and for our people." Gratitude poured through Orpah. She reached for her grandmother's hand, her fingers lacing through the other's gnarled ones. "Thank you, grandmother. I trusted you would know what to do." A smile touched Ruth's face, etching fine lines at the corners of her eyes. "I cannot promise knowing what to do, child. But I sense this scroll. It calls to us. It whispers of a bygone era, a time almost forgotten." Reaching for a small, bone-handled knife from the nearby table, she meticulously scraped away a layer of hardened mud clinging to a section of the scroll. The fire popped and hissed, the sole sound in the room as Ruth commenced deciphering the initial symbols. "This first word, it reads Kamash, our deity," she uttered reverently. "And this, King Misha. Indeed, it speaks of King Misha." Orpah leaned in, breathless. King Misha, a revered figure in Moabite lore, the warrior king who delivered them from their adversaries. The very notion this scroll might house his words, his saga. Hours drifted by as Ruth painstakingly translated the first few lines. The fire dwindled, casting elongated, dancing shadows upon the walls. Orpah remained beside her, watching, listening, her mind ablaze with possibilities. "This is a dedication," Ruth announced at last, her voice raspy with exhaustion. "A dedication to Kamash for bestowing victory in battle upon King Misha. He mentions the construction of a grand altar, a monument to their god." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the subsequent line. "And here, he references the Israelites. He brands them oppressors. He speaks of their barbarity." A shiver traversed Orpah's spine. The Israelites. Figures in the old tales, the stories grandmother recounted of their people's past. Their neighbors, their rivals. And according to this scroll, their sworn enemies. Ruth lifted her gaze to Orpah, her eyes conveying a mixture of apprehension and unwavering resolve. "This scroll, it recounts a narrative distinct from the one we've known, child. A narrative of Moab's might, when we were a force to be reckoned with. Yet also of conflict, of adversity, of the ceaseless struggle for survival." With measured movements, she carefully re-rolled the scroll. "This is a weighty burden, Orpah. Are you certain you are prepared to shoulder it?" Orpah met her grandmother's stare, a newfound determination hardening her gaze. "I unearthed this scroll, grandmother. It was destined for me to find. I cannot say why, but I know I must pursue this. I must learn its secrets, its purpose. Ruth nodded, a ghost of a smile gracing her lips. Then we shall proceed together, child. Together we shall unravel the mysteries held within this scroll and unearth the truth of our ancestry. But heed my warning, Orpah. The truth may not be what we expect. Echoes of Sodom. Ruth's fingertip danced across the time-worn script, her voice a soft murmur as she deciphered the text. Thus Chemosh, sovereign of gods, unleashed a fiery tempest upon the cities of the plain, a deluge upon Sodom and Gomorrah, for their depravity festered like a wound upon the land. Orpah drew nearer, the air pungent with the aroma of antique parchment mingled with the ghostly sin of dust and long-faded experiences. Sodom and Gomorrah? Every tongue knows those legends. Fables of righteous fury. Ruth inclined her head, her gaze, ordinarily alight with kindness, now held a glacial intensity. But this is Moab's chronicle, not the sweetened tales circulated amongst the Israelites. She pressed on, her intonation gaining strength, a bard conjuring a world with her words. Lot, Abraham's kinsman, resided within Sodom's ramparts, a transient adrift in a sea of iniquity. As celestial messengers descended, heralding destruction, Lot begged for deliverance for himself and his kin. Chemosh, consumed by wrath, perceived only the encompassing decay, the wickedness that strangled the very soil. He gave no heed to the pleas of a single mortal, be he just or not. Orpah shuddered, defying the oven-like atmosphere radiating from the stone walls of Ruth's dwelling. So, the scroll, it portrays Chemosh as an instrument of annihilation. Not entirely, Ruth corrected. It depicts him as detached, a natural cataclysm unleashed, heedless of individual fates. Attend. She renewed her reading, her voice reduced to a near inaudible breath. The emissaries, their mission fulfilled, steered Lot, his spouse, and his 2 daughters away from the doomed city. They were warned not to cast a backward glance, lest they succumb to Sodom's destiny. Yet Lot's wife, her spirit shackled to the life she was leaving, disobeyed. She was transformed into a saline pillar, a lasting testament to regret and longing. Orpah's breath caught in her throat. The narrative was familiar, of course. Every Israelite child absorbed it. But hearing it filtered through this archaic, Moabite understanding, it felt altered, soured with a somber insight. And Lot and his daughters sought refuge in the mountains? Indeed, Ruth validated, her finger unwavering across the scroll. They found sanctuary within a grotto, far removed from the scorching plains. But the daughters, Lot's daughters. Their saga is one of desperation and stark terror. Ruth paused, inhaling deeply, and Orpah witnessed the weight of those very words etched on her grandmother's countenance. This was no mere recitation, it was a voyage into the past, a resonance of ancient griefs. The scroll reveals their abject fear, Ruth resumed, her voice threaded with a poignant empathy. Believing themselves the last females alive, they perceived no hope for posterity, no prospect of continuing their line. Their father was aged, weakened from their trials. And thus, they embraced a choice. A horrific choice, born out of utter despair. Orpah felt an anxiety coil within her. She understood what loomed. The murmured shame, the veiled account that even the Israelites endeavored to suppress. One daughter implored the other, Ruth narrated, her voice barely a whisper. Our father is old, and there is no man upon the earth to come in to us after the fashion of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. The resulting silence was profound. Orpah could hear the frenzied thrumming of her pulse. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken judgment and nascent realization. They plied him with wine, Ruth continued, her voice emptied of emotion. And they bedded with their father, one after another. From these unions, Moab and Ammon were conceived. The founders of our lineage, born of incest, engendered by anguish, birthed from trepidation. Orpah recoiled, a wave of revulsion engulfing her. The elaborate embroidery of her legacy was unraveling before her very eyes, revealing coarse threads of dishonor and gloom. Does the scroll, does it vindicate their deeds? Orpah questioned, her voice faltering. Ruth shook her head in a slow, deliberate motion. It neither condones nor condemns. It merely chronicles the events as they were understood by the Moabites. It underscores the acute terror, the isolation, the certainty that they remain the sole salvation for humanity. It lays bare the decisions individuals make when confronted with utter annihilation. Decisions that are often, unforgivable. The descending sun cast elongated shadows across the chamber, painting the ancient scroll in shades of crimson and deep purple. Orpah gazed at the symbols, transformed from mere words into echoes of screams, whispers of fear, and the crushing burden of choices rendered in the face of unimaginable horror. The soothing fables of her youth had been supplanted by the raw truth of a savage past, a past now irrevocably intertwined with her very being. The comfortable story of divine retribution gave way to a dissonant choir of competing voices, each clamoring for dominance, each demanding acknowledgement. The birth of a nation. And from this act, Ruth breathed. Her voice, normally a still pond, rippled with tremors. Moab arose. Orpah's gaze locked onto the oil lamp. Its flame painted the cave's rough-hewn walls with capricious light. The name lingered, weighty and alien in this novel context. Moab, not a title of honor, nor a lineage sanctified by the true God, but a product, a transaction born of utter ruin. Ruth proceeded, a fingertip tracing the archaic script. The parchment acknowledges their disgrace, true, yet also their resolve. Weighted by their deeds, Lot's daughters sought solace further eastward, venturing into the wilderness's core. They found sanctuary in the heights, distant from the lingering reek of sulfur and the wind's accusatory sigh. Orpah conjured their plight, two solitary, expectant women, adrift in a landscape as pitiless as their predicament. The well-worn tale of divine retribution now morphed into a stark study of resilience. The terrain was brutal, Ruth intoned, her voice gaining steadiness as she advanced through the scroll. Water was a treasure, the sun a torment. They deciphered the desert's lexicon, finding nourishment where eyes saw only desolation. They became wanderers, chasing infrequent deluges, their existence shaped by the caprices of the heavens. Orpah's mind sketched the nascent Moabites, unrecognizable from the settled, occasionally prosperous society she knew. These were nomads, their hides tanned and lined by the sun's ferocity, their eyes ever scanning the horizon for survival's next mercy. Always, she knew the desert held cruelty as a constant companion, and now she understood it was not only an act of nature, but a haunting shadow. Their offspring, Ruth continued, arrived beneath the open expanse, cradled by the wilderness's rough embrace. They mastered hunting the ibex and the hare, weaving goat hair shelters, charting their course by celestial bodies. They were a resilient stock, tempered in hardship's forge. And Kamash? Orpah queried, her voice barely audible. What is written of Kamash? Ruth paused, a crease marring her brow. Here, he is not a demanding deity, not a sovereign over mortals. He is simply the land itself, the desert's essence, the sun that sears, the wind that whispers secrets, the rock that offers respite. He is the force that molds them, that challenges them, that ultimately permits them to persevere. It diverged sharply from the sanguinary idol she had been taught to dread. This Kamash felt almost detached, an impartial watcher of their trials, neither aiding nor hindering, merely existing as a constant. Other clans existed, of course, Ruth added. Remnants of shattered peoples, scattered by the cataclysm. Some were antagonistic, preying on the vulnerable. Others were more amenable. The Moabites, meager in numbers, discovered trade, haggling, alliances. They were survivors, above all. The scroll depicted their rights, not as veneration, but as pragmatic needs. Invocations for rain were desperate pleas. Sacrifices to desert spirits were attempts to appease the unpredictable powers that governed their fates. They erected stone cairns, Ruth recited, to signify routes across the shifting sands. They shared stories by the fireside, tales of their forebears, tales of Sodom and Gomorrah's demise, the legends of Lot's daughters. These were not yarns meant for glorification, but for memorial, to remind them of survival's cost, the choices that had birthed them into being. A strange resonance stirred within Orpah for these long-gone forebears. They were not champions, not saints, but flawed, yearning human beings who had acted as they must to endure. Their survival birthed something new, something lasting. They forged Moab. The scroll concludes here, Ruth announced, furling the fragile parchment. One record, admittedly, yet offering a divergent perspective, a different comprehension of our beginnings. Orpah lingered in silence, absorbing the weight of Ruth's words. The fables of her youth had splintered, replaced by a more intricate, more disquieting truth. She reflected on her own life, her decisions, her personal battle for survival. Perhaps, she mused, the spirit of the first Moabites persisted, not in grand declarations of belief, but in the steadfast commitment to endure, to adapt, to unearth a pathway to existence in a world that often seemed intent on annihilation. The cool night air seemed to carry the names of those who were before, the daughters of Lot, and the first Moabites, a nation born of desperation, but forged in the crucible of the desert. Balak and Balaam. Ruth's voice, raspy yet resonant, permeated the confines of their small tent. Lamplight painted her features with flickering luminescence as she deciphered the ancient text. Rumors of a vast migration reached Balak, Zippier's son, monarch of Moab. No simpleton, Orpah, he recognized the portent in the swirling dust devils on the horizon, the whispers on the wind hinting at a horde as countless as desert sands. His resolve crumbled. Orpah fidgeted, the coarse fabric of her cloak a dry rasp against her skin. She pictured Balak, a sovereign accustomed to the stark dominion of the wasteland, confronted by a staggering mass of humanity poised to consume his dominion. A chilling dread must have gripped him. Balak understood Moab couldn't withstand such a throng and open conflict, Ruth continued, her fingertip tracing the time-worn characters. Our forebears, forged in the crucible of survival, grasped the fragility of existence. One barren season, one formidable adversary, and oblivion beckoned. This Israel, they resembled an encroaching tempest. The scroll chronicled Balak's plight. He dispatched envoys, draped in luxurious goatskin robes and laden with offerings of dates, figs, and elaborate weavings, eastward, towards the lands bordering the Euphrates. Their quarry was Balaam, son of Beer. Balaam, Orpah breathed, the name sparking a faint recollection. The diviner? Indeed, Ruth confirmed, her attention riveted to the scroll. Not a prophet of Israel, preaching repentance and virtue. Balaam was something else. He conversed with entities beyond the veil, interpreted portents in avian flight, astral configurations, the viscera of sacrifice. A seer, a soothsayer, reputed to wield blessings and curses with equal force. Ruth paused, allowing the weight of Balaam's aura to fill the space. Orpah envisioned him, a skeletal figure, swathed in shadow, eyes gleaming with unsettling knowledge. She could almost detect the cloying scent of incense and the coppery tang of sacrificial blood that likely saturated his abode. Balak surmised that Balaam's malediction might prove a more devastating weapon than any army, Ruth elaborated. He reasoned that divine disfavor could shatter the Israelites' morale, halt their advance, and safeguard Moab. The emissaries, the scroll revealed, discovered Balaam within his solitary tower, a structure of sun-baked clay bricks that seemed to scrape at the heavens. They bowed low before him, presenting Balak's entreaty and his extravagant gifts. Balaam listened mutely, his expression an unreadable mask, dark pupils like fathomless pools reflecting cryptic visions. He instructed them to remain for the night, promising an answer in the morning after consulting with the spirits. Orpah imagined the taut atmosphere, the anticipation hanging heavy, the hushed murmurs of the messengers clustered around a sputtering fire. Ruth tapped the parchment. The following morn, Balaam declared he couldn't act without authorization from on high. He claimed the Israelite deity forbade him to curse them, proclaiming them a blessed people. Orpah's brow furrowed. The narrative felt incomplete, too simplistic. But the scriptures state Balaam eventually journeyed to Balak. He even counseled him on strategies to lure the Israelites into transgression. Ruth inclined her head. The scroll continues, Orpah. This was merely the initial gambit. Balak, a ruler not easily dissuaded, dispatched another delegation, this time bearing even grander treasures and comprised of more influential dignitaries. He contended that Balaam's initial demurral stemmed from insufficient inducement. The image of Balak, a king confronting the potential obliteration of his realm, haggling with a sorcerer, stirred a peculiar blend of pity and repugnance within Orpah. He was willing to degrade himself, to cast aside any semblance of rectitude, to ensure his people's survival. Was it valor or desperation's bitter fruit? Ruth sighed, a sound burdened with ancestral echoes. The seduction of authority, Orpah, is a potent current. The scroll hints that Balaam, despite his initial reservations, was captivated by the allure of riches and renown. The temptation to exert such influence over an entire nation proved irresistible. Orpah's heart plummeted. She knew the tale from scripture, knew that Balaam ultimately went to Moab. But hearing it from this ancient scroll, unveiled as a sequence of dire choices made by fallible individuals, painted a much more nuanced and disquieting picture than the simplistic narratives she'd learned. The demarcations between virtue and vice blurred, leaving her to wrestle with the uncomfortable truth of her ancestors' actions. The talking donkey. Ruth's finger traced the worn symbols, her voice a low hum in the dimly lit chamber. So, Balaam, swayed by Balak's overflowing coffers, finally agrees. He saddles his donkey, gathers his servants, and sets off towards Moab. Orpah leaned forward, picturing the scene. A lone figure, driven by greed, embarking on a path shrouded in moral ambiguity. But he knew it was wrong, didn't he? He had already been told not to curse them. Ruth nodded, her gaze fixed on the scroll. Indeed, and the text suggests the divine disapproval wasn't merely a whisper in his ear. It was demonstrative. She paused, a faint smile playing on her lips. Prepare yourself, Orpah. This is where the story takes a rather unusual turn. The air thickened with anticipation. Ruth continued, her voice adopting a slightly theatrical tone. Balaam rode, his mind likely filled with visions of gold and prestige. But the donkey, a creature of simple instincts, saw something he did not. The angel of the Lord, sword drawn and blazing, stood directly in their path. The donkey, sensing the danger, veered off the road into a field. Balaam, enraged, struck her with his staff, forcing her back onto the path. The angel, however, merely shifted position, appearing further along, now blocking the way through a narrow vineyard, walled on both sides. Again, the donkey, with a desperate attempt to avoid the divine presence, crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. Again, Balaam struck her. Orpah winced. Poor creature. It was only trying to protect him. Ruth sighed. Humanity rarely appreciates the warnings it receives, especially when blinded by ambition. The third time, the angel moved again, standing in a place so narrow there was no room to turn, no room to pass. The donkey, in utter desperation, simply lay down beneath Balaam. That must have infuriated him, Orpah murmured, imagining the scene. Indeed, Balaam, consumed by rage and frustration, beat the donkey mercilessly. And then, Ruth's voice dropped to a near whisper, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Then, Orpah, the donkey spoke. Orpah gasped. Spoke? You mean, like, with words? The scroll is explicit. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times? Orpah shook her head, struggling to reconcile the image of a talking donkey with the gravity of the situation. It felt almost comical, yet the ancient text presented it as a pivotal moment. Ruth continued, Balaam, surprisingly, doesn't express shock at first. He's too consumed by his anger. He replies, You have made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. He argues with a donkey? Orpah asked, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. He does. It's a testament to his arrogance, his utter belief in his own importance. He's so focused on his destination, on the riches awaiting him, that he's blind to the absurdity of the situation. And then, Ruth paused for effect, then the donkey poses a question that finally pierces his self-absorption. Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden, to this day? Have I ever been in the habit of doing this to you? The question hung in the air, a challenge to Balaam's perception of reality. Ruth lowered the scroll slightly, her eyes meeting Orpah's. And the text says, Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road, with his sword drawn in his hand. So he bowed low and fell face down. Orpah shivered. The image was striking. Balaam, finally seeing the divine presence he had so stubbornly ignored, humbled and terrified. The talking donkey, it seemed, had been the catalyst for his awakening. The angel then confronts Balaam, asking why he had struck his donkey 3 times. The angel explains that the donkey saved him because he was standing in the way with malicious intent, and that if the donkey had not turned aside, he would have killed Balaam. Ruth paused. Even in this ancient account, the story reveals complexities, doesn't it? Balaam's path was clearly wrong, yet it took such extraordinary measures to halt his progression. Blessings instead of curses. Ruth readjusted her spectacles, sunlight briefly blinding as it reflected off the lenses, and turned back to the time-worn scroll. There stood Balaam, finally grasping the magnitude of the divine's command. He was powerless to curse Israel, regardless of his own desires. And Balak, the king, throbbed with feverish anticipation. He'd spent a king's ransom, promising Balaam unimaginable treasures. The moment of truth had arrived. Orpah leaned in, a crease forming between her brows. But he didn't deliver the curse, did he? No, child. Instead, words of blessing poured from his lips. The scroll calls them auspicious pronouncements. He extolled Israel's might, their innumerable populace, their ascended destiny. He foretold a kingdom eclipsing all others. Orpah inhaled sharply. But why betray Balak? Ruth merely shrugged, the ancient parchment whispering in her hands. The divines will prevail, according to the text. Balaam was but a conduit. The king, naturally, erupted in fury. He accused Balaam of treachery, of siding with his adversaries. A tempest of rage consumed him. He rent his royal garments in a theatrical display. The scroll vividly captured Balak's incandescent fury, portraying a monarch brought low and humiliated. He branded Balaam a swindler, an impostor who'd accepted his gold under false pretenses, achieving nothing. Balaam, however, remained eerily unmoved, reiterating that he could only utter the divinely inspired words. 3 times Balak escorted Balaam to different high places, each hoping a new perspective would coax forth the desired malediction. Ruth continued. 3 times, Balaam instead showered blessings upon Israel. Each benediction grander than the last, each one a hammer blow to Balak's aspirations. Orpah conjured the scene in her mind, the frantic king pacing, sweat beading on his brow under the pitiless sun, his features twisted in apoplectic rage, Balaam, an enigmatic figure, his voice echoing across the desolate valley with prophecies of Israel's ascendance. The air itself seemed to vibrate with suppressed tension, charged with the weight of destinies realized and ambitions thwarted. The account then shifted to the mounting antagonism between Moab and Israel following Balaam's undesired pronouncements. Balak, consumed by feelings of betrayal and disgrace, viewed Israel's burgeoning power as an existential threat. He fortified his defenses, expanded his legions, and nursed a bitter resentment that would fester and corrupt generations to come. So, the blessings, they didn't usher in an era of peace, Orpah murmured. Peace? Child, peace is a fleeting visitor. Balak perceived those blessings as a declaration of war, a celestial signpost pointing toward his enemy's inevitable triumph. It was a toxin injected into the relationship between our people and the Israelites, poisoning it with suspicion, conflict, and enduring animosity. Ruth trailed off, the quiet punctuated by the whisper of leaves stirred by the breeze in the adjacent olive grove. Just then, a sardonic voice sliced through the stillness. Oh, please, a talking donkey and a royal hissy fit? Sounds more like a nursery rhyme than Holy Writ. Orpah and Ruth swiveled to see Ishmael lounging against the tent's entrance, arms crossed, an insolent grin etched on his face. He'd been eavesdropping, Orpah realized with rising irritation, absorbing every syllable. Ishmael, Orpah began, a hint of exasperation coloring her tone. Courtesy dictates a knock. And miss this enthralling drama? Unthinkable, he quipped, pushing off the frame and ambling inside. So, allow me to summarize. This Balaam fellow, this self-proclaimed seer, was bested by his own jackass? And this epiphany propelled him to bless our enemies? Are we really meant to believe this? Is this the profound wisdom you revere? Ruth sighed, a sound heavy with long-suffering patience born of countless similar exchanges with Ishmael. That's what's written in the scroll, Ishmael. And you swallow it whole, he scoffed. He plucked a date from a nearby bowl and tossed it into his mouth. They're just yarns, embellished fables masquerading as history, designed to control the masses. But the specifics, Orpah countered. The names, the locations, they resonate with authenticity. Ishmael chuckled, a mirthless, grating sound. Authenticity? Darling Orpah, reality is a malleable thing. And humankind has been concocting tales of gods and heroes since the dawn of time. This scroll, merely another iteration. A biased Moabitish perspective on events, pinned by individuals with a clear agenda. He flicked the date pit onto the rug with a dismissive gesture. Besides, even granting this ludicrous account were factual, of what relevance is it? So, ages ago, a king lost his temper and a beast of burden spoke. How does that impact our lives today? How does it aid our survival in this unforgiving realm? Orpah felt a twinge of uncertainty, a tiny seed of doubt planted by Ishmael's cynical words. She glanced toward Ruth, seeking reassurance, but her grandmother's expression remained inscrutable, a mask of calm contemplation. The weight of the scroll in Ruth's lap suddenly felt heavier, its ancient secrets less enlightening and more like an oppressive burden. Ruth, the Moabite. But what does any of this have to do with us? Orpah murmured, her question a faint echo of Ishmael's doubts. The sheepskin felt weighty in her grasp, freighted with the burden of forgotten lore. Ruth exhaled, a soft rush of air that disturbed the sunbeam illuminating dust devils within the tent. Steady, child. We're spanning a chasm, brick by painstaking brick. The tale of Balak and Balaam? One precipice. Now, let's examine the other. Her fingers sought a different scroll, its aged leather softened by countless recitations, its surface crisscrossed with wear. This tells of Ruth. Orpah's brow furrowed. Ruth? The Ruth? The Israelite Ruth. A network of fine lines deepened around Ruth's eyes as she smiled. But isn't that where the narrative takes an unexpected turn? This Ruth. She hailed from Moab, as do you. A current of surprise tingled through Orpah. She'd grown up knowing the saga of Ruth, that paragon of devotion, the ancestress of King David himself. Yet, she'd always envisioned her as Israelite. The familiar story certainly implied it. To think she shared that heritage, a Moabite. Ruth unfurled the scroll, her voice deepening with resonance as she began to intone the ancient words. In the era of the judges, scarcity gripped the land. Elimelech, with his wife Naomi and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, sought refuge in Moab. As she listened, Orpah conjured visions of scorched earth, the desperation compelling Elimelech's family across territorial lines. She recognized that terrain, the land her forebears had cultivated, a place of simultaneous promise and peril. And in time, Elimelech succumbed, followed by Mahlon and Chilion, leaving Naomi widowed, attended by her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. A peculiar sense of affinity arose in Orpah's heart. These figures, familiar by name and role, suddenly felt tangibly real, connected to her in a way she hadn't previously comprehended. Ruth continued, hearing in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people with abundance. Naomi resolved to return to Judah with her daughters-in-law. And Naomi addressed them, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to the departed and to me." Ruth paused, her gaze locking with Orpah's. Herein lies the crux. Here loyalty is weighed, and one's character revealed. The scroll emitted a soft crinkle as she turned it. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung steadfastly to her. And Naomi pleaded, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Follow her example." But Ruth countered, "Do not press me to forsake you or to turn back from following you. For where you journey, I shall journey, and where you reside, I shall reside. Your people are now my people, and your God, my God. Where you meet your end, I shall meet mine, and there I will be buried. May the Lord's severest judgment fall upon me if anything but death separates us." The declaration hung in the stillness, thick with commitment and selflessness. Orpah shuddered, not from cold, but from the sheer force of the pledge. The narrative was familiar, of course, but hearing it spoken now, in this context, it held a profound resonance. And so, Ruth proceeded. Ruth accompanied Naomi to Bethlehem. Being a Moabitess, she gleaned in the fields, collecting leftover grain to sustain herself and her mother-in-law. Orpah pictured Ruth, an outsider in a foreign country, stooping to gather discarded stalks overlooked by the reapers, the shame, the vulnerability, and beneath it, the indomitable spirit. As fate would have it, she gleaned in the field belonging to Boaz, a man of standing from Elimelech's clan. A trace of warmth imbued Ruth's voice. Boaz observed her generosity, her industry, her steadfast dedication to Naomi, and his heart was moved. The saga unfolded, describing Boaz's protective gestures, his admiration for her integrity, and ultimately, his decision to redeem Elimelech's property and claim Ruth as his wife, securing both their futures. And Boaz took Ruth as his wife, and the Lord blessed her with conception, and she bore a son. Ruth paused, her eyes bright. And they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Orpah fixed her gaze on the scroll, her thoughts spinning. Ruth, the Moabite, the forebear of royalty. A woman whose faithfulness and compassion had transcended national divisions and religious disparities. "Do you see, child?" Ruth inquired softly, her hand gently covering Orpah's. "There is virtue in Moab, just as there is in Israel. We are all children of the same God, struggling to find our way. This Ruth. She chose unwavering loyalty over easy escape, love over trepidation. She chose to embrace a different culture, a different faith, and in so doing, she altered the course of history." Orpah swallowed, the sensation of oppressive weight replaced by a fragile spark of optimism. Could it be possible? Could her own lineage, a heritage she had been conditioned to scorn, actually be a source of such goodness, such resilience? King Eglon's rule. Ruth delicately unrolled another section of the time-worn scroll. Sunlight, filtering through Naomi's window, painted the faded script in hues of gold. Tiny dust specks pirouette in the illuminated air, a miniature echo of the turmoil churning within Orpah. "Listen," Ruth began, her tone even. "This recounts the reign of King Eglon." Ishmael, who had been leaning against the wall, pretending to carve a piece of wood, straightened imperceptibly, his attention now undeniably fixed on their exchange. He affected indifference, but Orpah detected a glint of something akin to fascination in his eyes. Ruth commenced reading. The ancient Moabite script flowed smoothly from her lips. And again, the Israelites strayed from the path of the Lord. Therefore, the Lord empowered Eglon, sovereign of Moab, against them for their transgressions. A shiver traced Orpah's spine despite the room's warmth. The familiar biblical cadence, the note of judgment, chafed against her burgeoning desire for comprehension. Eglon, Ruth continued, amassed an army of Ammonites and Amalekites and struck Israel, seizing the city of palms. The scroll narrated Eglon's conquest with a detached composure that unsettled Orpah. No exultant pronouncements, no self-aggrandizing claims, simply a matter-of-fact account. He led his forces across the Jordan, overwhelming the fractured Israelite defenses. Jericho, the city of palms, succumbed rapidly, its fortifications breached, its inhabitants subjugated. And the Israelites served Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Ruth paused, her eyes finding Orpah's. 18 years of servitude, of extracted wealth, of foreign occupation. Orpah's throat tightened. 18 years. A whole generation born into bondage. She recalled childhood whispers of this era, tales of Moabite supremacy, always portrayed as deserved retribution for Israelite sins. But the scroll offered no such moralizing, only the stark reality of dominion and suppression. What kind of ruler was he? Orpah asked, her voice barely audible. Ruth pondered the query. The scroll depicts him as a practical leader, above all. A powerful figure, undeniably, but not given to gratuitous cruelty. He demanded loyalty, tribute, yet also maintained stability. He recognized that a productive, though enslaved, populace was of greater value than a defiant one. From his corner, Ishmael emitted a snort. Productive for whom? Those 18 years were surely a period of unmitigated suffering for the Israelites. Perhaps, Ruth conceded, turning to Ishmael. But the scroll also speaks of the internal division within Israel at that time. Factions competing for authority, neglecting the welfare of the people. Eglon exploited that vulnerability. The scroll detailed the imposition of onerous levies, the confiscation of resources, the forced impressment of Israelites into Moabite work crews. Fields went untended as farmers were compelled to construct fortifications and roads for their overlords. Families faced starvation. Religious observances were curtailed, supplanted by the worship of Moabite deities. Orpah envisioned the fear, the bitterness, the suppressed fury that must have consumed the Israelites during those years. She had always perceived them as a unified people, favored by divine grace and unconquerable. But the scroll painted a different portrait, a fragmented nation, susceptible and vanquished. It wasn't all triumph and virtue for them, was it? Orpah mused, the question directed more inwardly than at Ruth. Ruth offered a gentle smile. History rarely presents such clear lines, Orpah, for anyone involved. Ishmael detached himself from the wall and strolled toward them. So, what are we supposed to do now? Feel pity for the Israelites? They reaped what they sowed. No one deserves to be oppressed, Ishmael, Orpah countered, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Not the Israelites, not anyone at all. He arched an eyebrow, a trace of wry amusement in his expression. Well, look at you, sister. You almost sound like you're buying into this rewriting of the past. Orpah disregarded his sarcasm, her gaze riveted on the scroll. The weight of her ancestors' actions settled heavily upon her, a burden she was only just beginning to shoulder. Yet, beneath that weight, an unfamiliar sense of connection was taking root, a feeling of being grounded in something authentic, something intricate and deeply human. Ruth laid a hand on Orpah's arm. There is more to unravel, Orpah. Much more still. Orpah met her gaze, a glimmer of hope igniting within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, grasping her past might illuminate the path to a different future. She glanced at Ishmael and noticed a subtle shift in his countenance, a flicker of genuine interest supplanting his customary air of ennui. Ehud's dagger. Ruth's fingertip traced the age-worn characters etched into the scroll, her brow creased in thought. After 18 years of oppression, she began, her tone a measured balance against the fire's sporadic snaps. The Israelites cried out for deliverance. And the divine raised up a rescuer, Ehud, son of Gera, of the tribe of Benjamin, distinguished by his left-handedness. Orpah leaned in, her eyes studying the intricate patterns adorning the parchment. A southpaw? Was that significant in some way? The text seems to emphasize it, Ruth commented, drawing her shawl tighter, suggesting this deviation might have been seen as a vulnerability, a trait easily discounted. Perhaps he was chosen precisely for that reason, for being unexpected. Ishmael, who had been a silent observer, shifted his stance. Another tale of the underdog then. Scriptures are full of them. Ruth, unfazed, continued her recitation, and the Israelites sent tribute via him to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Ehud had fashioned a double-edged dagger, about 18 inches in length, which he concealed beneath his garments, strapped to his right thigh. Orpah's brow furrowed. The right thigh? Wouldn't access be easier from the left, given his dominant hand? Precisely the point, Ruth responded, a subtle smile gracing her lips. Deception. Any search would naturally target his left side, anticipating easy reach for a left-handed man. Its placement on the right ensured it remained hidden from cursory searches. A burst of heat from the hearth sent fiery sparks spiraling up towards the smoke vent. Within Orpah's mind, she saw Ehud, a lone figure honing his blade, each hammer blow echoing with both righteous fury and a desperate yearning for freedom. So, he gains access to Eglon, Orpah prompted, eager to know the outcome. Ruth's voice adopted a more dramatic rhythm as she resumed, and Ehud approached him, declaring, "I have a confidential matter for your ears, O king." To which Eglon commanded, "Silence." And all his attendants withdrew. Ehud found him seated in a cool upper room, reserved for his private use, and stated, "I bear a message from the divine." And at this, the king rose from his throne. Orpah's breath hitched as she envisioned the lavish chamber, the stifling air, the heavy atmosphere of anticipation. Eglon seems unsuspecting in all this. Confident, perhaps even arrogant, Ruth corrected, her gaze flitting across the scroll. He considered himself unassailable in his dominion. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, Ruth read, her voice softening to a near whisper, and drew the dagger from his right thigh, plunging it deep into the king's abdomen. The hilt sank in after the blade, and the surrounding fat closed around it, preventing its removal, and excrement seeped out. Orpah recoiled, a physical manifestation of the gruesome imagery. The narrative held nothing back from the stark reality of the act. The final detail of excrement lingered, a harsh counterpoint to any heroic notions, a vulgar, grounding truth, stripping away any potential for romanticizing the violence. Ishmael scoffed quietly. How picturesque. Ruth directed a sharp look his way, then pressed on. Ehud then exited through the portico, securing the doors from the outside. Upon their return, the servants noticed the locked doors and reasoned, he is merely relieving himself in his private chamber. Relieving himself? Orpah echoed, perplexed. A euphemism, then? Precisely, Ruth confirmed, a hint of distaste coloring her tone. They assumed he was simply using the latrine. Eglon was known for his considerable girth. Orpah shuddered. The image of the corpulent monarch, isolated and defenseless, flashed through her mind. Was this righteous retribution, or merely a ghastly act born from despair? And they waited until they grew uneasy, Ruth continued, and, perceiving that he did not unlock the doors, they retrieved a key and opened them, only to discover their master collapsed, lifeless, upon the floor. A weighty silence settled within the cavern. The only sound now was the faint whispering of the fire, reduced to smoldering remains. And Ehud made his escape while they lingered, Ruth continued, her voice fading. And he passed beyond the idols, toward Sirith. Upon his arrival, he sounded the shofar in the highlands of Ephraim, and the Israelites descended from the mountains, with him at their head. And he declared unto them, Follow me, for the divine has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands. And they followed him, seizing the fords of the Jordan, preventing all passage into Moab. And they struck down about 10,000 Moabite men, all strong and valiant. Not a single one escaped. Thus, Moab was subdued under the hand of Israel that day, and the land enjoyed peace for 80 years. Ruth meticulously rolled the scroll closed, her features indecipherable. Orpah remained speechless, wrestling with the implications woven within the tale. Ehud, the unlikely champion, both assassin and liberator. Was he a savior or simply a killer? And what did this mean for her own people, the Moabites, branded as the enemy, deserving of such brutal reprisal? The carefully constructed narratives she had always known crumbled around her, replaced by a chaotic, ambiguous, and deeply troubling truth. The Moabite stone. Orpah's fingers ghosted over the scroll's faded inscription, her brow a tight knot of concentration. The strange Moabite symbols swam before her, coalescing into words she painstakingly teased out. The Misha steel, she breathed, the phrase barely disturbing the room's heavy silence. An inscription, a royal proclamation. Ruth's eyes sparked with eagerness. "Read on, child. Let's hear what King Misha declared." Orpah swallowed, then began, her voice gaining strength as she progressed. The stele recounted battles waged, cities razed, and deities venerated. It chronicled Misha's revolt against Israelite dominion, his hard-won victories, and his fealty to Chemosh, the Moabite god. The carved stone presented a sharp divergence from the Israelite-centric narratives she'd always known. Here, the Moabites weren't the vanquished, the cursed, but a proud people battling for their freedom and ancestral lands. Omri, sovereign of Israel, crushed Moab for years uncounted, for Chemosh was angered. His son succeeded him, vowing, "I too shall grind Moab beneath my heel." But I scorned him and his dynasty, and Israel was brought low, forever extinguished. Orpah broke off, a tremor in her voice. The pronouncements rang with power, defiance, a gauntlet thrown down before the established historical record. Ishmael, perched as always by the window, shifted his weight, a scoff hovering on his lips. Propaganda, then? Every king likes to inflate his accomplishments. What else is new? Ruth's gaze was sharp. It is more than mere bluster, Ishmael. It offers a different lens through which to view these events, a perspective systematically scrubbed from the narrative we know. Considering alternative viewpoints is crucial, especially those that challenge our own convictions. Resuming, Orpah's thoughts raced. The Misha stele meticulously detailed the building of a shrine for Chemosh, the reconstruction of ravaged cities, and the seizure of Israelite strongholds. The inscription conjured a vision of a thriving Moabite kingdom under Misha's reign, a radical departure from the biblical depiction of a people perpetually under Israel's thumb. And Chemosh commanded me, "Go, seize Nebo from Israel." I descended under cover of night and fought from dawn until midday. I took it, and put all inhabitants to the sword, dragging them before Chemosh's sacrifice. Orpah's voice faltered, almost inaudible. The raw brutality of the conquest sent a shiver down her spine. Ishmael leaned forward, his habitual cynicism momentarily abandoned. So, they weren't only the oppressed? They were aggressors as well. Ruth gave a measured nod. History is seldom a simple morality play, Ishmael. It is not just about heroes and villains in stark relief. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of courage and cruelty, triumph and defeat, pride and humiliation. The Misha stele offers no absolution for the violence, but it invites us to understand the motivations and beliefs that fueled it. Orpah concluded her recitation, her mind struggling to reconcile the discordant accounts. The story she had absorbed since childhood presented Israel as the righteous nation, divinely appointed to claim the land, and the Moabites as their treacherous, idolatrous foes. But the Misha stele offered an alternate truth, a glimpse into a people fighting for survival, defending their borders, and venerating their own deities. But how can these versions both be true? Orpah asked, her voice laced with bewilderment. The Bible asserts one thing and the stele another. Which one reveals the truth? Ruth offered a gentle smile. Perhaps neither holds the entire truth, Orpah. Perhaps it resides somewhere in the spaces between the words, in the silences and the omissions. Truth is often multifaceted, reflecting the inclinations and prejudices of those who chronicle it. Ishmael frowned, scratching at his stubbled chin. So we are to believe both everything and nothing simultaneously? It seems perplexing. It is indeed complex, Ruth affirmed. But that is the very nature of history. It is not a simple accumulation of facts, but an elaborate network of interpretations. We must approach it humbly, willing to question our certainties, with an open mind to consider alternative viewpoints. She paused, her gaze meeting Orpah's. This scroll, it is not intended to diminish the suffering borne by the Israelites, nor to excuse the actions of the Moabites. It offers a more nuanced perspective on our shared history, a history shaped by conflict, but also by an enduring resilience, by faith, and by a deep-seated connection to this land. Ishmael, surprisingly, appeared thoroughly engaged. So, what followed Misha's reign? Did the fighting between them continue? Ruth smiled, delighted by his sudden interest. The story extends far beyond Ishmael. The boundaries between Moab and Israel grew blurred and shifting over centuries. Alliances were formed, fractured, and reforged. There were eras of harmony and eras of bloodshed. The Moabites, like the Israelites, confronted their own challenges, achieved their own victories, and suffered their own tragedies. This scroll offers glimpses of those times. It offers glimpses into our ancestors' lives, a prophecy of hope. Orpah's fingertips traced the worn grooves of the Mesha steel. The cool basalt offered momentary respite from an inner fire kindled by tales of battle and sacrifice. She had anticipated mere bluster, proclamations of Chemosh's dominion. But a different cadence echoed from the stone, an undercurrent of surprise. "Grandmother," she breathed, voice hushed with wonder. "There's more here. It's different." Ruth drew nearer, her aged eyes still keenly observant. Ishmael leaned in from behind Orpah, forehead creased in concentration. As Orpah continued, her voice gained assurance, giving life to the archaic script. It wasn't a chronicle of triumphs or a declaration of authority, but a prophecy whispering promises of brighter days. Though Chemosh has tested us, though we have faltered and fallen, a time approaches when Moab's descendants shall flourish anew. They will earn their place among the nations, not through violence or conflict, but through empathy and insight. The arid lands will once more teem with life, and the name of Moab will inspire reverence, not disdain. She concluded, the pronouncement lingering like the scent of myrrh. A stunned quiet descended upon them, broken only when Ishmael shifted uncomfortably. Compassion? Understanding? After all the boasts of slaughter and divine fury, his tone was laced with bewilderment. Ruth laid a comforting hand on Orpah's arm. History, Ishmael, rarely follows a predictable course. Even amidst warfare and zealotry, the seeds of hope can take root. Orpah sought understanding in her grandmother's gaze. But how can this be reconciled? It clashes with everything we know. Does it truly? Ruth countered, a glint of amusement in her eyes. Or does it offer a contrasting perspective? Perhaps even Mesha, deep within, yearned for something beyond ceaseless hostility. Perhaps he envisioned a future where Moab could thrive in peace, liberated from its perpetual struggle with Israel. She indicated the steel. This prophecy, Orpah, speaks to our people's unyielding spirit. It acknowledges our hardships, our failings, yet refuses to let them define us. It foretells a future where Moab discovers redemption, not through martial prowess, but through embracing virtues that transcend boundaries and creeds. Orpah contemplated her grandmother's words. The very notion of Moab finding redemption, of rising above the endless cycle of strife, was revolutionary. It challenged the ingrained narrative, the one that cast Moab as the perennial foe, the cursed nation. But the curse, Ishmael started, then trailed off, recalling Ruth's earlier dismissal of such pronouncements. Curses are mere utterances, Ishmael, Ruth stated firmly. Words spoken by mortals, fueled by dread and ire. They only hold sway if we grant them power. This prophecy, however, is a different kind of utterance. It's a seed of optimism, sown within the heart of our history, a summons to shatter the chains of the past. She turned her unwavering gaze upon Orpah. This signifies that our saga is far from complete, child. Moab's saga remains ongoing. It's a narrative shaped each day by those who share our heritage. A warmth bloomed within Orpah, banishing the lingering confusion and unease. The weight of history, which had felt crushing moments ago, now felt lighter, filled with promise. The prophecy transcended mere historical record. It spoke directly to the future, to Moab's potential for reinvention, for choosing a different destiny. The sun descended further, painting long shadows across the arid expanse. A gathering breeze stirred through the nearby brush, carrying the earthy fragrance of the desert and whispers of distant rain. Orpah closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, picturing a future where Moab's parched earth blossomed, not with the spoils of war, but with the fruits of amity and mutual respect. A future where her people were celebrated not for their defiance, but for their benevolence. She opened her eyes, a newfound resolve blazing within them. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and arduous, but this unearthed prophecy had infused her with purpose. She wasn't merely unearthing the past, she was helping to sculpt her people's future. "Grandmother," she declared, her voice firm and resolute, "what course do we take now?" Ruth smiled, a web of fine lines radiating from her eyes. "Now, Orpah, we persevere on our path. We seek tales of those who embody this prophecy, those who strive for peace and understanding. We glean wisdom from their experiences, sharing their hope with all." Ishmael, still looking slightly bewildered, managed a nod. "So, we seek out the good within Moab's narrative? Even after witnessing all that we have?" "Especially after witnessing all that we have," Ruth replied, her voice ringing with unwavering faith. "For it is during our darkest hours that hope's light shines with its greatest brilliance." Sharing the story. The Misha Steele's long silent testimony weighed on Orpah, not as a yoke, but as a budding possibility. It was a nascent idea, a spark of comprehension ignited in the arid landscape of Moab's chronicle. "Grandmother, we must share this," she urged, her voice a tremulous whisper of conviction. "This isn't solely ours, it belongs to everyone." Ruth affirmed, her eyes mirroring the sun's golden rays filtering through the tent opening. "I knew you'd recognize it, child. The past isn't a prison, Orpah, but fertile ground. We can tend it, sow new ideas, and cultivate something transformative." Ishmael, a silent observer until now, shifted, a shadow of unease crossing his face. "Share it? With whom?" Most are satisfied with the familiar narratives, tales of conquest, of Baal, of... He trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Then we offer them an alternative," Orpah countered, her gaze locking onto his. "A saga of fortitude, of devotion, and the latent possibilities of amity. It's the chronicle of our ancestors' trials, their errors, and the understated acts of grace obscured by layers of judgment." She rose, pacing the confined space of the tent, her enthusiasm effervescent. "We can begin modestly, with the women drawing water, the children playing in the square. We can tell them of Chemosh's decree, the prophecy of understanding. We can reveal that Moab transcends the perceptions of the Israelites, or even our own self-imposed limitations." Skepticism clung to Ishmael, yet Orpah perceived a nascent curiosity flickering within his eyes. "It won't be simple," he cautioned. "People are entrenched in their beliefs, tethered to the familiar, even if it causes pain." "I understand," Orpah responded softly. "But isn't the endeavor worthwhile? Isn't it worth offering them a chance to see themselves anew?" Silence descended, punctuated only by the wind's whisper against the tent. Finally, Ishmael sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "Very well," he conceded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'll assist you. I know the elders. I can at least attempt to gain their ear." Orpah's spirit soared. "Thank you, Ishmael. Your support is immeasurable." The following dawn saw Orpah and Ishmael embark on their endeavor. They began in the marketplace, a vibrant tapestry of commerce where farmers traded and merchants peddled their wares. Orpah chose her words as carefully as a weaver selecting threads, approaching small gatherings of women near stalls overflowing with dates and figs. She spoke not of sweeping victories or potent rulers, but of her forebears' daily lives, their struggles for survival, their acts of empathy, and the understated strength found in togetherness. "Did you know," she asked, her tone clear and resonant, "that our ancestor Ruth, a Moabite woman, chose to forsake her own kin and accompany her mother-in-law Naomi to a distant land? She was driven by affection and fidelity, a connection surpassing boundaries and creeds. Some listened with intrigue, others with wariness, but none could deny the emotive power of her narrative. She depicted the women who cultivated the land, the men who wrested sustenance from the unyielding terrain, the children playing in the sun-baked streets. She painted a portrait of Moabite existence that was both recognizable and novel, a tapestry woven with threads of adversity and hope." Ishmael, surprisingly, became a valuable asset. He leveraged his insight into the community to identify those receptive to their message, speaking with a quiet gravitas that commanded attention. He reminded them of the significance of conserving their heritage, comprehending their origins, and learning from past failings. "We cannot undo what has transpired," he declared to a cluster of men by the well. "But we can choose our interpretation. We can emphasize the violence and animosity, or we can seek out moments of empathy and understanding. The decision lies with us." As days bled into weeks, Orpah and Ishmael persisted in their mission, disseminating their message throughout the community. They encountered resistance, certainly. Some clung fiercely to ingrained beliefs, unwilling to entertain a different viewpoint. However, others were receptive to a fresh narrative, a narrative that offered a spark of optimism for what lay ahead. One evening, as Orpah sat with her grandmother, watching the sun melt into the horizon, she experienced a powerful epiphany. The true saga of Moab was not about military dominance or rigid religious doctrine. It was about resilience, the capacity to withstand hardship and discover solace in unity. It was about fealty, the bonds of kinship and companionship that transcended borders and ideologies. Ultimately, it was about the potential for renewal, the prospect of learning from past missteps, and crafting a brighter tomorrow. This was the inheritance of Moab's children. This was the story she yearned to impart.